Shadwell, in East London, sits in the area known as the Docklands. It has two stations, one on the Overground and one on the Docklands Light Railway. What's less well known is that it has a third station that sits abandoned. Let's talk a little about the history of Shadwell's three stations. Shadwell's railway history goes back a long way. Actually, it begins with the opening of this viaduct in 1840. This viaduct was built for the London and Blackwall Railway, a line built to connect the City of London to the docks at Blackwall. It was one of the world's first commuter railways designed to only carry passengers, with stations spaced closely together. It was built to a gauge of 5 feet wider than the 4 feet 8.5 inches that was rapidly becoming the standard elsewhere. Due to the fear of fire in the docks, trains on the line were cable-hauled. The line had an unusual mode of operation where at each station the trains would release a coach from the back and attach a new coach at the front, all without stopping. Fine if you wanted to travel to or from either of the termini, not much use if you wanted to travel between intermediate stations. The line opened on the 6th of July 1840, but the station at Shadwell would open on the 1st of October that year, ever so slightly east of the Docklands Light Railway station. Passenger numbers on the old line were never particularly high, with passengers preferring the horse buses along the commercial road. Towards the end of the 1840s, the London and Blackwall Railway decided to abandon the cumbersome and frankly weird method of cable haulage, rebuild the line to standard gauge and begin running conventional steam locomotive-hauled trains. This was less to attract passengers to the line and more to enable other railways to run trains over what should have been a useful route. It worked. Following the completion of their work in 1850, the line saw an increase in dividends for their irate shareholders to up to 4.5%. In 1895, the track was doubled between Fenchurch Street and Stepney to give fast trains to Tilbury and Southend their own track without having to pick their way around local trains. As Shadwell is on that section, the station was rebuilt, and that is the station you see today. Well, the partial station you see today. In 1900, the station was renamed to Shadwell and St George's East. Despite these improvements, passenger numbers at Shadwell and St George's East remained low. Buses and trams were more attractive to locals travelling the route, and to be honest, it wasn't exactly a horrendous trek on foot. While the line remained useful for goods trains and carrying messages, the station was a loss-maker. In 1916 it was closed as a wartime economy measure, which happened to a lot of stations in East London. In 1919 it reopened, but things did not improve. The killing blow was the Second World War. The Docklands were heavily targeted by bombing, which reduced passenger numbers even further. With so many families being bombed out of their homes and many others not wanting to wait around until it was their turn, the local population declined. On the 7th of July 1941, Shadwell and St George's East closed altogether. Well, sort of. I'll get back to that. Now we're going to skip back in time to 1865. That year, a new railway company was incorporated, the East London Railway. The primary aim of this company was to provide a link between the railways on both sides of the Thames in East London via the docks. The company was a joint venture between 6 other railways: the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, the South Eastern Railway, the London, Chatham and Dover Railway, the Metropolitan Railway, the District Railway, and the Great Eastern Railway. It used the Thames Tunnel, the subway under the river built by Mark Isambard Brunel that had opened in 1843. The tunnel had never been a success, and its owners were more than happy to sell it off. The East London Railway extended the tunnel at both ends in stages. The extension to Shoreditch opened in 1876, along with Shadwell Station. The old station building was here. The trains were steam-operated, and this octagonal structure near the station is actually a ventilation shaft to release smoke and steam from the tunnel. You can see these all along the length of the East London Line and indeed in the stations themselves. The London, Brighton and South Coast Railway built a class of locomotive with the East London Railway in mind. These were nicknamed the Terriers, due in part to their habit of diving underground. I mention this mostly because one of the Terriers was actually named Shadwell. The London, Brighton and South Coast also contemplated building a direct rail connection to the London and Blackwall line here, so who knows what the modern railway map would look like if they had. Come to think of it, who knows what Shadwell would look like if they had? They'd have had to knock down a lot of buildings around here. In 1913, the line was electrified. The Metropolitan Railway took charge of passenger services, as they had experience with this form of traction, and from here on, the East London Railway effectively became an underground line. At least, from a passenger perspective. The East London line was a useful link for goods trains, but under the Metropolitan Railway and later London Underground, in my opinion, it wasn't given the respect it deserved. For instance, it was once possible to get a train from Shadwell all the way to Hammersmith. That service was withdrawn in 1939. There was a physical connection to Liverpool Street, which was little used by passenger trains, and that was pulled up in 1966. The result was a short, isolated line in East London that got no closer to central London than Shoreditch. Not without its uses, but very little used as compared to the rest of the network. In 1983, Shadwell Station gained a new building, the old one being abandoned and eventually demolished in 2010. That 1983 building is the one you see today. In 1995, these murals were installed at platform level. In the 1990s, there was talk of an East London Line extension to make it more useful. That eventually evolved into the London Overground, with the northern end of the line being connected at Shoreditch to the line to Dalston Junction in 2010, and the southern end linking to the South London Line in 2012. Now, the East London Line is once again the useful link between north and south that it was always intended to be. And Shadwell is now a connection between two important rail systems. Which brings us on to the third station, Shadwell DLR. Shadwell is the first station east if you're coming from either Bank or Tower Gateway. It was one of the first stations on the system to open in 1987. Rather than reuse the disused Shadwell and St George's East entrance, it's built into the viaduct itself, which gives better access to the East London Line station. That being said, there is an exit very close to the old entrance. When the DLR was first built, no one really knew how much of a success it would be, so it was assumed that short trains consisting of a single articulated two-car unit would be more than enough to serve the system. But investment started pouring into the Docklands at a rate totally unanticipated, and the DLR's place was changing. It had been built as a low-budget, fairly bare minimum project, if we're honest. Now it was going to have to be a proper metro. 2 units would be the minimum needed for trains serving the Docklands, and Shadwell was extended to meet this new requirement in 1991, the same year that the branch to Bank opened. In the future, it may be that Shadwell will become a single station. As I mentioned, the Docklands have changed a lot since the 1980s. Now there's the Overground, the Jubilee Line and the Elizabeth Line, and some of the interchanges struggle with passengers changing trains. The question has arisen, could Shadwell be the solution? At present it's an out-of-station interchange. For fare purposes, both stations count as a single station, but they are separate. As an interchange, it's far from perfect. There's no step-free access to either station. The change involves crossing an often busy street, and both stations are quite small. So it would require a total rebuild of both stations, likely with Shadwell DLR being resited slightly west of its present position, and a new building being put on top of the ventilation outlet in the Overground. It seems unlikely that this will happen any time soon, if at all. So I won't be finishing my 2 abandoned stations in Shadwell script in the immediate future. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do click on that like button and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon, as well as here on YouTube. You are the DLR to my London and Blackwall. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.